The deep space mining vessel Perseverance drifted through the asteroid belt of the Kepler 442 system, its hull scarred from countless micrometeor impacts. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, watching her crew work the extractors on a particularly rich platinum asteroid. The routine operation should have been simple: drill, extract, move on. But today something was different. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's xenobiologist. His voice carried an unusual tremor that made Sarah's stomach clench. In 15 years of deep space mining, she'd learned to trust that tone. It meant trouble. Sarah made her way through the cramped corridors to the laboratory section, where Webb stood hunched over a holographic display. The image showed what appeared to be a massive creature embedded within the asteroid's core, revealed by their deep-bore scanners. "What am I looking at, Doc?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew this discovery would change everything. Webb manipulated the hologram, rotating the three-dimensional image. "It's biological, Captain. Definitely not human, and unlike anything in our xenological databases, the creature appears to be hibernating, possibly for an extremely long period." The being was enormous, easily 200 meters in length, with a serpentine body covered in what looked like thick, scaled hide. But what caught Sarah's attention were the countless small objects covering its surface, creating a grotesque, barnacle-like coating that seemed to pulse with its own alien life. "Those parasites," Webb continued, highlighting the attached organisms, "they're slowly draining the creature's life force. Our scans show the host is barely alive, existing in some form of suspended animation, while these things feed off it." Sarah studied the readings carefully. The creature's vital signs were incredibly weak, fluctuating in patterns that suggested immense suffering. Whatever this being was, it had been trapped in this torturous state for potentially millions of years based on the asteroid's geological composition. "Any idea what species we're dealing with?" Sarah asked. Webb shook his head grimly. "The DNA structure is unlike anything we've encountered. The creature appears to be ancient beyond our current understanding of evolution. But Captain, there's something else." He pulled up additional scans. "The being's brain activity shows patterns consistent with higher intelligence. This isn't just some space whale, this is a sentient creature." The weight of that revelation settled over the small laboratory. They weren't just looking at an alien animal. They were looking at someone who had been suffering in conscious agony for eons. "What about the parasites?" Sarah inquired, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "They're fascinating from a scientific standpoint," Webb replied, his academic enthusiasm briefly overriding his concern. "They appear to be some form of energy vampire, sustaining themselves on the host's life force while keeping it alive indefinitely. It's a perfect parasitic relationship, except for the host, which experiences constant torment." Sarah watched the slow, labored breathing patterns of the creature on the monitor. Each breath seemed to take tremendous effort, and she could almost feel the weight of its suffering across the cold vacuum of space. "Can we extract it?" she asked finally. Webb looked surprised. "Captain, this creature is massive. Our mining equipment isn't designed for biological extraction, especially something this delicate. Plus, we don't know if removing it from the asteroid would kill it immediately." "But those parasites are killing it slowly anyway," Sarah pointed out. "At least if we try to help, there's a chance." "There's also the question of what happens if we succeed," Webb added carefully. "We have no idea what this creature is capable of when fully conscious and healthy. It could be grateful or it could see us as a threat." Sarah turned away from the hologram and looked out through the laboratory's small porthole at the asteroid field surrounding them. Humanity had spread across the galaxy, mining resources and establishing colonies, always taking what they needed. But here was an opportunity to give something back, to show that humans could be more than just takers. "What do your readings show about the creature's current condition?" she asked. Webb pulled up more detailed scans. "It's deteriorating, albeit slowly. The parasites have been feeding for so long that they've reached an equilibrium. They're taking just enough to sustain themselves without killing their host outright. But that balance is shifting. Our scans suggest the creature might have only a few more centuries before the parasites finally drain it completely." "Centuries sounds like a long time," Sarah mused. "Not for a being that's already survived millions of years," Webb replied. "From its perspective, it's facing imminent death after an eternity of suffering." Sarah made her decision with the swift certainty that had made her an effective captain. "We're going to help it. Start running scenarios for extraction. I want options, Doc. Webb looked uncertain. Captain, this could be incredibly dangerous. We don't know anything about this species' biology, psychology, or capabilities. What if it's hostile? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Sarah replied firmly. But I'm not leaving a sentient being to suffer when we might be able to help. That's not who we are as humans. As Sarah left the laboratory to brief her crew, she didn't notice the subtle change in the creature's bio readings, a slight uptick in brain activity that suggested perhaps it had somehow sensed their presence. Deep within its tortured consciousness, something that had been dormant for millennia began to stir, responding to the first glimmer of hope it had felt in eons. The crew of the Perseverance gathered in the main conference room, their faces reflecting a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Sarah had called an emergency meeting to discuss their unprecedented discovery, and word had already spread through the ship's tight-knit community of miners and researchers. I know this isn't what we signed up for, Sarah began, addressing the 23 souls under her command. We came here to mine platinum, not to perform alien rescue operations. But sometimes life presents us with choices that define who we are as human beings. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, a grizzled veteran of 30 years in space, spoke up first. Captain, with all due respect, our equipment isn't designed for this kind of operation. The mining lasers could accidentally damage the creature, and our extraction systems are built for chunks of rock, not living tissue. Dr. Webb nodded in agreement. The Chief's right about the technical challenges. But I've been running simulations and I think we might have a solution. He activated the holographic projector in the center of the table. The key isn't trying to extract the entire creature at once. We need to focus on removing the parasites first. The display showed a detailed close-up of the barnacle-like organisms covering the ancient being. Each parasite was roughly the size of a human torso, with root-like appendages that had burrowed deep into the host's flesh. These parasites have a simple nervous system, Webb explained. They respond to specific electromagnetic frequencies. If we can generate the right signal, we might be able to convince them to detach voluntarily. Navigation Officer Lisa Park, the youngest member of the crew, raised her hand tentatively. What happens to the parasites after they detach? Do they just die? That's the humane beauty of this approach, Webb replied. The parasites are essentially space-dwelling organisms. Once they detach, they can survive independently in the vacuum, possibly finding other hosts or energy sources. We're not committing genocide, we're just ending an abusive relationship. Rodriguez remained skeptical. And what about power requirements? Our ship's reactor wasn't designed to generate the kind of electromagnetic pulse you're talking about. Actually, it can, interrupted communications specialist Tommy Chen, Sarah's nephew who had earned his position through merit rather than nepotism. I've been analyzing the frequency requirements. We'd need to reroute power from non-essential systems and boost our signal array. But it's theoretically possible. Sarah watched her crew debate the technical aspects, impressed by their willingness to consider such an unprecedented mission. What about the creature itself? What condition will it be in once the parasites are removed? Webb's expression grew more serious. That's the unknown factor, Captain. The creature has been in this state for so long that its body might have adapted to the parasite's presence. Removing them could trigger massive physiological shock. On the other hand, it might begin to heal immediately. Either way, added Chief Medical Officer Dr. Janet Okafor, we'll need to monitor its vital signs throughout the process. If we see signs of distress, we might need to abort the procedure. Sarah appreciated her crew's thorough analysis, but she could see the underlying concern in their eyes. They weren't just worried about technical difficulties, they were worried about the consequences of success. Captain, Rodriguez said carefully, what happens if this creature wakes up and isn't grateful for our help? We're talking about something that's potentially millions of years old and possesses intelligence we can't even comprehend. It might see us as insignificant insects. Or worse, added Park quietly, it might see us as a threat to be eliminated. Sarah had wrestled with these same concerns throughout the night. Those are valid fears, she acknowledged. But consider the alternative. We leave a sentient being to continue suffering for potentially centuries more, all because we're afraid of the consequences of doing the right thing. She stood up and moved to the viewport, looking out at the asteroid containing their unexpected patient. Humanity didn't become a spacefaring species by playing it safe. We got here by taking risks, by choosing hope over fear, and by believing that we could make a difference in the universe. Tommy Chen pulled up the creature's brain scan patterns on his tablet. Captain, I've been analyzing the neural activity we're detecting. The patterns are consistent with extreme distress, but there's something else. Mathematical sequences that repeat in complex formations. What kind of sequences? Webb asked, leaning forward with interest. They're beautiful, actually, Tommy replied, sounding almost surprised by his own words. Like music or poetry, but expressed in mathematical relationships. I think this creature might be trying to maintain its sanity by creating mental art. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just looking at a suffering alien. They were looking at an artist, a thinking being that had spent millions of years creating beauty in its mind to survive unimaginable torment. Dr. Okafor spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. We have to try to help it. The medical oath I took applies to all sentient life, not just humans. One by one, the other crew members voiced their agreement. Rodriguez, despite his technical concerns, admitted that his engineering expertise was meant to solve impossible problems. Park, the youngest among them, declared that she wanted to be part of the generation that showed the universe what humanity stood for. All right then, Sarah said, feeling a surge of pride in her crew. We're going to attempt the first interspecies medical intervention in human history. Webb, I want hourly progress reports on your electromagnetic frequency research. Rodriguez, start working on the power rerouting procedures. Tommy, keep monitoring those neural patterns. If the creature's mental state changes, I want to know immediately. As the crew dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah remained at the viewport staring at the asteroid. She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would be remembered as a turning point, not just for her crew, but for humanity's place in the galactic community. Unknown to Sarah and her crew, their radio communications had been detected by a monitoring station at the edge of the system. The message, compressed and encoded, was already racing toward the capital worlds of 3 different alien civilizations, each of which had very different opinions about humanity's growing presence in the galaxy. 3 days into their preparation, the Perseverance had transformed from a mining vessel into an improvised medical facility. Every available crew member worked around the clock, modifying equipment and running countless simulations. The ship's corridors hummed with an energy that had nothing to do with their reactor. It was the electricity of purpose, of humans pushing beyond their limitations to achieve something extraordinary. Dr. Webb had barely slept since the discovery, poring over xenobiological data and theoretical electromagnetic frequencies. His research had revealed something remarkable about the parasite's neural structure. They operated on a form of quantum consciousness that made them incredibly sensitive to specific harmonic vibrations. The frequency has to be perfect, Webb explained to the assembled technical team in the converted cargo bay. Too low and the parasites won't respond. Too high and we risk damaging the host's nervous system. Chief Engineer Rodriguez wiped grease from his hands as he emerged from beneath a newly modified signal amplifier. The power distribution is ready, Doc, but we'll only get one shot at this. The strain on our reactor will be enormous. If we have to abort and restart, we'll need at least 6 hours to cool down the system. Tommy Chen looked up from his monitoring station, where multiple screens displayed the creature's ongoing neural activity. The mathematical patterns are getting more complex. It's almost like the creature knows something is about to happen. Captain Sarah studied the readings with growing fascination. The being's consciousness remained active despite its physical torment, creating intricate mental constructs that served as both art and survival mechanism. It was a testament to the power of intelligence and will that humbled her. Any word from the other teams? Sarah asked. Navigation Officer Park consulted her tablet. The medical monitoring station is operational. Dr. Okafor has 3 different contingency plans ready depending on how the creature responds to parasite removal. The extraction team has confirmed that our mining grapplers can be reconfigured to support the creature's body weight once it's free from the asteroid. The complexity of their undertaking was staggering. They weren't just removing parasites, they were potentially awakening a being that had been unconscious since before human civilization existed. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Webb's communicator chirped with an incoming message from the ship's laboratory. "Doctor, you need to see this immediately," came the voice of his research assistant, Dr. Sarah Kim. The team hurried to the lab, where Kim had isolated a single parasite specimen for detailed analysis. The creature writhed in its containment field, its translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. "I've been studying its feeding mechanism," Kim explained, manipulating the holographic display to show the parasite's internal structure. "These organisms don't just feed on biological energy, they're actually feeding on conscious thought itself." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. These weren't merely physical parasites, they were consciousness vampires, sustaining themselves on the very essence of their host's awareness and intelligence. "That explains the mathematical patterns," Tommy whispered. "The creature isn't just creating mental art to stay sane. It's fighting back against the parasites by generating thoughts too complex for them to fully absorb." Webb stared at the data in amazement. "This being has been engaged in a mental war for millions of years, using its own intelligence as both weapon and shield. It's been protecting itself by thinking thoughts so beautiful and complex that the parasites can't completely drain them." Sarah felt a new level of respect for their patient. This wasn't just a victim. This was a warrior who had been fighting an impossible battle for longer than human history, never surrendering despite unimaginable odds. "Doctor," Rodriguez said slowly, "if these parasites feed on consciousness, what happens to them when we force them to detach? Won't they just die of starvation?" Kim shook her head. "Actually, no. The parasites appear to be capable of entering a dormant state when consciousness food isn't available. They can survive independently for extended periods, possibly centuries, until they find a new host." "That's somewhat comforting," Sarah admitted. "We're not committing mass murder. We're just ending an abusive relationship that should never have started." As the team prepared to return to their stations, Tommy's monitoring equipment began chiming with urgent alerts. The mathematical patterns in the creature's neural activity had suddenly changed, becoming more organized and purposeful. "Captain," Tommy called out, his voice tight with excitement and concern, "I think it's trying to communicate with us." The patterns flowing across the screens were no longer random artistic expressions. They were structured sequences that repeated and varied in ways that suggested language. The ancient being had somehow become aware of their presence and was attempting to make contact. Webb rushed to Tommy's station, analyzing the data streams. "These aren't just mathematical patterns, they're mathematical concepts. Look at this sequence. It's expressing prime numbers, then moving to geometric relationships, then to more complex algebraic formulas. It's trying to establish that it's intelligent," Sarah realized. "It's showing us that it understands mathematical truths that transcend species and language barriers." The patterns continued evolving, becoming more sophisticated with each iteration. Soon they began incorporating physical constants, the speed of light, gravitational relationships, atomic structures. The being was demonstrating not just intelligence but advanced scientific knowledge. "Captain," Tommy said quietly, "it's not just showing us that it's intelligent. Look at these last sequences." He highlighted a series of patterns that had only appeared in the last few minutes. "It's showing us the mathematical relationships governing electromagnetic frequencies. Specifically, the frequencies we need to remove the parasites." The silence in the laboratory was profound. The creature wasn't just aware of their presence, it understood their intentions and was actively helping them plan its own rescue. "It's been listening to our communications," Webb breathed. "Somehow, despite being nearly comatose, it's been monitoring our radio signals and learning about our rescue attempt." Sarah stared at the flowing patterns of mathematical beauty, each one representing a thought from a mind older than her entire species. "This changes everything. We're not just rescuing a victim. We're making first contact with a civilization that might be older than Earth itself." The weight of that responsibility settled over the crew like a heavy blanket. They were no longer just miners attempting a good deed. They were humanity's first ambassadors to an ancient intelligence that had survived the unimaginable. The moment had arrived. After 5 days of preparation, the crew of the Perseverance stood at their stations ready to attempt something no human had ever done before. The ship's main reactor hummed at near maximum capacity, powering the modified electromagnetic array that would hopefully free the ancient being from its torment. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the command center, surrounded by displays showing the creature's vital signs, power distribution levels, and the precise frequency calculations that would make or break their rescue attempt. The mathematical communications from the being had continued, growing more complex and beautiful with each passing hour, as if it were sharing the accumulated wisdom of millions of years. All stations report ready. Captain, announced Tommy Chen from his communications post. The young man had become the de facto translator for the creature's mathematical language, developing an intuitive understanding of its thought patterns that impressed even Dr. Webb. Medical monitoring is green, reported Dr. Okafor from her newly configured station. All contingency protocols are standing by. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm from the engine room. Reactor is stable at 93% capacity. Power distribution channels are locked and loaded. We're as ready as we'll ever be, Captain. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. In her 15 years commanding deep space operations, she had never faced a decision with such far-reaching consequences. They were about to wake up a being that had been dormant since before human civilization existed, a creature whose intelligence and capabilities were utterly unknown. Dr. Webb, begin the electromagnetic pulse sequence, Sarah ordered. Webb's hands moved across his control panel with practiced precision, initiating frequency generation, starting at 2.7 terahertz and modulating upward. The ship's hull began to vibrate with a barely audible hum as the electromagnetic array came online. On the main screen, they could see the asteroid containing their patient, now illuminated by the invisible energy being directed at its core. Parasite response detected, Tommy reported, monitoring the bio readings. Their neural activity is increasing. They're becoming agitated. The creatures covering the ancient being were beginning to writhe and pulse with increasing intensity. After millions of years of peaceful feeding, they were experiencing their first serious challenge to their dominance over their host. Increasing frequency to 3.1 terahertz, Webb announced. Parasite detachment beginning in Sector 7. On the magnified view of the creature's surface, they could see the first parasites beginning to release their grip. The root-like appendages that had burrowed deep into the host's flesh slowly withdrew, leaving behind wounds that immediately began to glow with a soft, healing light. The creature's natural healing mechanisms are activating, Dr. Okafor observed with amazement. Its cellular regeneration rate is incredible. The wounds are sealing within seconds of parasite removal. More parasites began detaching as Webb continued to adjust the frequency with microscopic precision. Each successful removal revealed more of the being's true form beneath the grotesque coating that had covered it for eons. The creature's skin was not the dull, scarred surface they had expected, but a beautiful pattern of iridescent scales that shifted color in response to the electromagnetic stimulation. Neural activity is spiking, Tommy reported, his voice tight with excitement. The mathematical patterns are becoming more coherent. It's like watching someone wake up from the deepest sleep imaginable. The creature's consciousness was indeed awakening. The mathematical communications that had been fragmented and dreamlike were now flowing in clear, organized streams of thought. Geometric patterns gave way to more complex concepts, expressions of gratitude, wonder, and something that could only be described as joy. 50% parasite removal achieved, Webb announced. The remaining parasites are resisting more strongly, but the frequency adjustments are still effective. As more of the creature's surface was revealed, they began to see its true magnificent form. The being was serpentine but elegant, with delicate fin-like appendages along its sides and a head that tapered to an almost graceful point. Its scales caught and reflected light in patterns that seemed to shift with its thoughts. Captain, Dr. Okafor called out with concern, the creature's vital signs are fluctuating dramatically. Heart rate is increasing, neural activity is off the charts, and its core temperature is rising. Sarah felt a moment of panic. Are we causing damage? Should we abort? No, Captain, Tommy interrupted, studying the mathematical patterns flowing across his screens. It's not distress, it's euphoria. The creature is experiencing consciousness without pain for the first time in millions of years. It's overwhelming but not dangerous. The being's joy was becoming evident in every measurement. Its thought patterns expressed concepts of beauty, freedom, and gratitude in mathematical relationships so complex and beautiful that Tommy found himself moved to tears just watching them flow across his monitors. 75% complete, Webb reported. The remaining parasites are clustered around the cranial region. They seem to be making a final stand. These last parasites were indeed fighting harder to maintain their hold. They had burrowed deeper and held more tightly, as if sensing that their millions of years of easy feeding were coming to an end. Adjusting frequency to 3.8 terahertz, Webb announced. This should convince them that resistance is futile. The final wave of electromagnetic energy washed over the asteroid, and the last of the parasites began their reluctant retreat. As each one detached, the creature's scales grew brighter. Its healing accelerated and its mental patterns became more vibrant and complex. Final parasite detachment complete, Webb announced with triumph in his voice. The patient is free. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient being existed without the constant drain of consciousness vampires feeding on its thoughts. The change was immediate and dramatic. Its scales shifted to brilliant colors that painted rainbow patterns across its magnificent form, and its neural activity exploded into symphonies of mathematical beauty that spoke of intelligence beyond human comprehension. "Captain," Tommy whispered, staring at his screens in awe. "It's trying to say something. The patterns are forming words, human words." The mathematics flowing across the screen began to organize into familiar concepts, then into recognizable language structures. Slowly, painfully, the ancient mind was learning to communicate in human terms, drawing from their radio transmissions and finding ways to express thoughts older than Earth's civilization, in words that humans could understand. Finally, a message appeared on their screens in perfect English. "Thank you, small ones. You have given me back my dreams." The ancient being's first words in human language sent shockwaves through the crew of the Perseverance. Captain Sarah Chen stared at the message displayed on their screens, feeling the profound weight of being humanity's first contact with a civilization that predated their species by millions of years. "Small ones," Tommy Chen repeated softly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose from its perspective we really are." The creature's communication continued to flow across their screens, each message more sophisticated than the last as it rapidly adapted to human language patterns. The mathematical foundations of its thoughts remained visible beneath the words, creating poetry that was both alien and beautiful. "I have been aware of your presence since you first approached my prison," the being communicated. "Your electromagnetic signatures were unlike anything I had experienced in my long captivity. There was something in your thoughts that the parasites could not touch. Hope, curiosity, and a desire to help without expectation of reward." Dr. Webb leaned forward, fascinated by the linguistic complexity they were witnessing. "It's not just learning our language, it's understanding the emotional and philosophical concepts behind our words. This level of intelligence is staggering," the creature continued. "You called me patient in your communications, but I have not been patient. I have been desperate, maintaining my sanity through mathematics because numbers are pure truth that parasites cannot corrupt. I created equations of beauty because beauty was the only weapon I had against the darkness." Sarah felt humbled by the revelation. They had witnessed not just suffering, but an act of creative resistance that had lasted longer than human civilization. This being had used its intellect as both shield and sword, fighting a war of consciousness that would have driven lesser minds to madness. "Can you tell us your name?" Tommy typed into the communication system they had established. "Names are concepts of identity, and identity requires freedom to have meaning," came the reply. "I had a designation among my people, but that being died with my capture. If I am to be reborn through your kindness, perhaps I should choose a new identity to mark this transformation." The crew exchanged glances, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. An ancient intelligence choosing to be reborn in their presence, deciding to define itself anew after eons of suffering. "My people had a word that translates roughly to your concept of dawn, the moment when darkness gives way to light, when hope overcomes despair. In your language, I believe this would be aurora. I choose this as my new designation, for you have brought me dawn after an endless night." Aurora's physical form was continuing to change as its healing progressed. The magnificent scales now pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to mirror its thought processes, creating a visual representation of its consciousness that was breathtaking to observe. "Aurora," Sarah said aloud, testing the name. "We're honored to meet you. I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Perseverance. Can you tell us about your people? Are there others like you?" The response came slowly, laden with sadness that transcended species barriers. "My civilization spanned galaxies when your star was young. We were explorers and philosophers, seekers of knowledge and creators of beauty. But our success made us targets for the consciousness parasites you have freed me from. Aurora's communication paused, and the mathematical patterns underlying its thoughts shifted to expressions of grief and loss that were universal in their emotional impact. The parasites spread through our empire like a plague of living nightmares. They turned our own curiosity against us. The more intelligent the host, the more nourishing their consciousness became. My people fought bravely, but how do you battle enemies that feed on the very thoughts you use to resist them? The weight of Aurora's revelation settled over the crew. They weren't just speaking with an individual. They were potentially the only witnesses to the history of an entire extinct civilization. I was among the last of my kind, fleeing in a ship designed to carry the accumulated knowledge of my people to safety. But the parasites found me even in the deep void between galaxies. They overwhelmed my defenses and began their feeding. But my ship's emergency systems activated, encasing us in the asteroid material as a form of cryogenic preservation. Dr. Okafor spoke up from her medical station. "Aurora, how long were you imprisoned?" "Our geological analysis suggests millions of years." "Time lost meaning during my captivity," Aurora replied. "I measured existence not in years but in thoughts preserved, equations protected, memories safeguarded against the parasite's hunger." "But if your dating is correct, then I have been imprisoned since before your species developed language." The enormity of Aurora's suffering became clear. While humanity had evolved from primitive ancestors to spacefaring civilization, this ancient being had been conscious and trapped, protecting the last remnants of its people's knowledge through sheer force of will. "Your species fascinates me," Aurora continued. "I have observed your communications, studied your thought patterns, analyzed your decision-making processes. You are young, but there is something in your consciousness that reminds me of my own people in their early years. Boundless curiosity, irrational optimism, and a tendency to help others even when it offers no benefit to yourselves." Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came over the comm from engineering. "Captain, Aurora's energy readings are increasing dramatically. Whatever healing process is happening, it's accelerating." Indeed, Aurora's form was growing brighter and more vibrant with each passing hour. The creature's natural recovery systems, freed from the parasite's drain, were working at an incredible pace to restore millions of years of accumulated damage. "I feel strength returning that I had forgotten I once possessed," Aurora communicated. "But with healing comes choice. I could leave this system, seek others of my kind who might have survived in distant corners of the universe. Or," the pause was significant, and Sarah sensed they were about to hear something important, "or I could choose to stay and learn more about the species that showed such unexpected compassion to a stranger. Your people intrigue me, small ones. You risk yourselves for others, you find beauty in helping, and you choose hope even when logic suggests despair. These are qualities my people valued above all others." Sarah felt the crew's attention focus on her. This was a moment that would define not just their mission, but potentially humanity's future relationship with advanced alien intelligence. "Aurora," Sarah said carefully, "you're welcome to stay as long as you wish. We would be honored to learn from you, and perhaps you might find our company worthwhile as well." The mathematical patterns flowing across their screens suddenly burst into brilliant displays of joy and gratitude that needed no translation. Aurora had found something it had never expected to discover after the fall of its civilization: friendship. 3 weeks had passed since Aurora's liberation, and the Perseverance had become something unprecedented in human history. A shared space where two vastly different species learned from each other. The ancient being had grown strong enough to separate from the asteroid, its magnificent serpentine form now floating gracefully alongside their ship, held in position by gentle gravitational manipulators. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation lounge, watching Aurora's scales shimmer with patterns that she was beginning to recognize as expressions of contentment. The being's presence had transformed their routine mining mission into something that would be remembered for generations. "Captain," Dr. Webb approached, carrying a tablet filled with xenobiological data. "Aurora's sharing of its people's scientific knowledge is revolutionizing our understanding of physics. The gravitational field equations alone could advance human technology by centuries." Sarah nodded, though her thoughts were focused on something more immediate. "Any word from Earth Command about our situation?" Webb's expression grew concerned. That's what I wanted to discuss. We've been receiving coded transmissions suggesting that other species in this sector are aware of Aurora's awakening. Some of them don't seem pleased about it. The implications were troubling. Aurora's people had been hunted to extinction by consciousness parasites. But there might be other alien civilizations that had their own reasons for preferring the ancient being remained imprisoned. Has Aurora mentioned this? Sarah asked. Actually, that's another issue, Webb replied. Aurora has been withdrawn for the past few days. Its communication patterns have changed. I think it's worried about something but doesn't want to burden us with its concerns. Sarah frowned. In the week since Aurora's liberation, the being had been remarkably open and curious, eager to learn about human culture and share its own knowledge. A sudden change in behavior was concerning. I'll speak with it, Sarah decided. In the meantime, keep monitoring those transmissions. If we're about to have unwelcome visitors, I want to know about it. Sarah made her way to the communication array, where Tommy Chen was on duty. The young man had become Aurora's primary conversational partner, developing an almost intuitive understanding of the being's thought patterns. Tommy, can you establish a private channel with Aurora? I need to discuss something sensitive. Of course, Captain, Tommy replied, his fingers dancing across the controls. Aurora's been in a contemplative state for the past few hours. Its mathematical patterns have been unusually somber. The communication link activated, and Aurora's familiar presence filled the channel. Greetings, Captain Chen. I sense concern in your electromagnetic signature. What troubles you? Sarah appreciated Aurora's directness. We're receiving indications that other alien species know about your awakening. I'm worried that our rescue mission might have attracted unwanted attention. Aurora's response came after a long pause, accompanied by mathematical patterns that conveyed deep sadness and regret. Your concern is well-founded, small one. My awakening has indeed been detected by those who have reason to fear my people's return. What kind of enemies are we talking about? Sarah asked directly. Not enemies in the way you might understand, Aurora replied. When my civilization fell, there were species that benefited from our absence. Trade routes, territories, and resources that became available when we were no longer present to claim them. My awakening suggests that my people might not be as extinct as they believed. The full scope of the situation began to dawn on Sarah. Aurora wasn't just an individual, it was potentially the harbinger of a lost civilization's return, a development that could reshape the entire galactic political landscape. Aurora, are there others of your people still alive? I do not know, Aurora admitted. But I carry within my consciousness the genetic templates and cultural knowledge of my entire species. With the right resources and sufficient time, I could theoretically restore my people from extinction. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They hadn't just rescued an individual. They had potentially resurrected an entire advanced civilization. The implications were staggering. Captain, Tommy interrupted urgently. I'm detecting multiple ship signatures approaching our position. They're not using any known human propulsion systems. Aurora's communication immediately shifted to a tone of protective urgency. Captain Chen, your people have shown me kindness beyond measure. I will not allow harm to come to you because of my presence. I can depart immediately. Absolutely not. Sarah cut off Aurora's offer firmly. We don't abandon friends. If these aliens have a problem with your freedom, they'll have to discuss it with all of us. The next few minutes passed in tense preparation as the crew of the Perseverance prepared for their first contact with hostile alien forces. The approaching ships were clearly advanced, using propulsion technologies that human science couldn't fully comprehend. 3 vessels approaching, reported Navigation Officer Park from the bridge. They're maintaining formation but haven't made any aggressive moves yet. Dr. Okafor's voice came over the comm from the medical bay. Captain, Aurora's vital signs are spiking. It's experiencing what I can only describe as extreme emotional distress. Sarah realized that Aurora was facing not just the possibility of re-imprisonment, but the potential destruction of the humans who had freed it, for a being that had spent millions of years in solitary suffering. The thought of losing its newfound friends must be unbearable. Aurora, Sarah said firmly over the communication channel, we're going to get through this together. You spent millions of years alone. You're not alone anymore. Aurora's response came as a surge of mathematical patterns that expressed gratitude, determination, and something that could only be described as fierce protective love. Then we face this together, small ones. But know that I will not allow my liberation to become your destruction. The alien ships moved into position around the Perseverance, close enough to be threatening, but not so close as to be immediately hostile. They were clearly waiting for something, perhaps hoping that the humans would simply hand over Aurora without a fight. Incoming transmission, Tommy announced. It's in multiple languages, including Human Standard. The message was brief and coldly diplomatic. Human vessel, you are harboring a dangerous entity whose awakening threatens galactic stability. Surrender the creature to us immediately, and you will be allowed to depart safely. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing determination and defiance in every face. These were miners and scientists who had signed up for a routine asteroid operation, but they had become something more. They had become Aurora's protectors and humanity's first ambassadors to a complex and dangerous galaxy. Tommy, open a channel to the alien ships, Sarah commanded. Let's show them what humanity stands for. As the communication link activated, Sarah prepared to deliver humanity's first diplomatic message to a hostile alien coalition, knowing that her words might determine not just Aurora's fate, but the future relationship between humans and the wider galactic community. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the communication array, knowing that her next words would echo through galactic history. The alien ships waited in formation around the Perseverance, their weapons powered but not yet targeted, giving her one chance to prevent what could become humanity's first interstellar war. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Perseverance, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. We received your demand for the surrender of our friend Aurora. Our response is simple. No. The silence that followed stretched across space like a held breath. Sarah could feel her crew's tension, but also their unwavering support. They had made their choice weeks ago when they decided to help a suffering stranger. You misunderstand the situation, human, came the alien response, transmitted in coldly perfect English. The entity you call Aurora is the last remnant of a species that once dominated this galaxy. Its awakening threatens the balance of power that has maintained peace for millions of years. Aurora's communication burst through their private channel, mathematical patterns expressing anguish and self-recrimination. Captain, they speak truth in their own way. My people were powerful, and our return would indeed change everything. Perhaps I should— Aurora, Sarah interrupted firmly. You have the right to exist, period. No one gets to decide that. You're too dangerous to live based on what your ancestors might have done millions of years ago. She turned back to the alien communication channel. Unknown vessels, you speak of balance and peace, but what kind of peace requires the eternal suffering of a sentient being? What kind of balance is maintained through torment? The alien response came more quickly this time, with an edge of frustration. You do not understand the complexities of galactic politics, young species. Aurora's people were not destroyed by parasites alone. They were destroyed because their power made them a threat to every other civilization. Tommy Chen suddenly looked up from his monitoring station, his eyes wide with realization. Captain, I'm detecting a pattern in the alien ship signatures. These aren't three different species, they're all using technology derived from Aurora's people. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. These weren't just species that had benefited from Aurora's people's extinction. They were civilizations that had built their own advancement on stolen technology from the very species they now claimed was too dangerous to exist. Aurora, Sarah said over their private channel. Are you detecting this too? Aurora's response came laden with a sadness so profound it transcended species barriers. Yes, small one. I recognize the quantum signatures of my people's technology in their ships. These beings did not simply benefit from our fall, they were among those who caused it. The true scope of Aurora's tragedy became clear. The ancient being hadn't just been a victim of parasites, it had been the survivor of a genocidal conspiracy that had used consciousness-feeding parasites as weapons to destroy an entire civilization. Human captain, the alien. Transmission continued. You have 30 seconds to comply with our demand or we will take Aurora by force. Sarah felt a surge of anger that burned away her diplomatic caution. Let me make something very clear to you. Aurora is under the protection of humanity. If you want to harm our friend, you'll have to go through us. Your ship is insignificant compared to our vessels, came the alien reply. We do not wish to destroy you, but we will if necessary. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Aurora's massive form began to glow with patterns of light that grew steadily brighter and more complex. The ancient being was awakening capabilities that had been dormant for millions of years, drawing on knowledge and power that predated these alien civilizations. Small ones, Aurora's communication reached the entire crew. You have shown me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. You risked everything to save a stranger, asking nothing in return. This is a nobility that my people prized above all other virtues. The light emanating from Aurora's scales intensified, and suddenly the space around the Perseverance began to shimmer with energy fields that human science couldn't comprehend. Ancient technologies that had been sleeping for eons were coming online, responding to Aurora's awakening consciousness. What you are witnessing, Aurora continued, its mathematical patterns now visible as actual light displays across its entire form, is the reactivation of knowledge that your accusers stole and corrupted. They fear my awakening not because I am dangerous, but because I am witness to their crimes. The alien ships suddenly found themselves caught in gravitational fields that made their advanced technology seem primitive by comparison. Their weapons powered down involuntarily, their propulsion systems failed to respond, and their communication systems were flooded with mathematical proofs of their historical guilt. Aurora, Sarah whispered in awe, you're not just an individual survivor. You're a living archive of an entire civilization. More than that, Aurora replied, its joy now radiating through space in waves of beautiful energy. I am proof that extinction is not always permanent, that consciousness can survive the darkest nights, and that hope can triumph over despair when allied with courage. The alien ships began to retreat, their theft exposed and their technological advantage neutralized by the very knowledge they had stolen and failed to fully understand. As they fled, Aurora's communication reached out to them one final time. Tell your people that Aurora lives, and with me, the memory of what was done to my civilization. But tell them also that I do not seek vengeance, I seek justice, understanding, and the chance to rebuild what was lost through cooperation rather than conquest. As the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Sarah felt the weight of what they had accomplished settling over her. They had not just rescued an individual, they had resurrected hope for an entire species and demonstrated to the galaxy that humanity could be trusted with power. Aurora, Sarah said, what happens now? The ancient being's response came filled with warmth and possibility. Now, small one, we begin the most important work of all, showing the galaxy that different species can live together in friendship rather than fear. Your people have given me back my life, and I choose to dedicate that life to ensuring that the compassion you showed me spreads throughout the stars. Aurora's form began to shift and change, revealing capabilities that had been hidden during its long imprisonment. The being wasn't just a survivor, it was a living seed of hope that could help birth a new era of galactic cooperation. Together, Aurora concluded, its mathematical poetry now painting rainbows across the vacuum of space, we will prove that the universe is large enough for all of us to flourish. The Perseverance continued its journey through the asteroid field, no longer just a mining vessel but the flagship of humanity's first interstellar alliance. Behind them, the empty asteroid that had once been Aurora's prison now served as a monument to the power of compassion and the courage to do what is right, even when the consequences are unknown. In the weeks and months that followed, Aurora's knowledge would help humanity advance by centuries, but more importantly, its friendship would teach them that true strength lies not in power over others, but in the willingness to help those who suffer. The rescue of Aurora became the foundation story of humanity's role in the galaxy, not as conquerors or exploiters, but as the species that chose compassion over fear, and proved that even the longest night must eventually give way to dawn.